Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And this morning on Cool Your Deals with Lillian, our special guest is Douglas Vermeeren, who created and directed a movie called How Thoughts Become Things. So good morning, Douglas. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
I am quite delighted. And if you could please give just a little background on who you are and then answer the universal question, what motivated you to put together a film like this called How Thought Becomes Things?
Absolutely. So I guess the long and short of it is the media calls me the modern-day Napoleon Hill for my interviews with more than 400 of the world's top achievers. And so at a young age, in fact of 19, I went out and I started interviewing some of the top business leaders, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, celebrities, athletes in the world. And no one's really done that work since Napoleon Hill. So I wanted to know what made these people tick and made them successful. And naturally, film was one of the best ways to share that vision. And so this is actually my fourth movie. In fact, three of my other ones, the previous movies, are all in the top 10 personal development movies of all time. But this one right now, we're doing so well that it's very likely that it's even going to replace The Secret as the all-time best-selling personal development movie of all time. So that's kind of my journey, and it's been very exciting.
Well, congratulations, too, on that. I know that humans, as a rule, are very afraid to let new things in for whatever the reason. So when you come in telling them that if you think the right thoughts and quell the chaos of your thoughts, that you can actually turn them into physical things, which to most people would almost sound like wizardry.
Well, you know, it's interesting because most people, I think, discount the power of their thoughts, right? Like they do not realize how much their thinking actually affects their outcomes. The truth is where we really put, you've heard, where you put your focus is really where your destiny is built. And I think that a lot of times people, you know, they take that for granted. So, you know, when we're in sort of our day-to-day routines, most people kind of default to autopilot, and they don't really invest the effort or the time to consciously think about what it is that they're creating. And I think that that's what we're really trying to solve in this film, is to show people the real power that they have inside themselves. And then naturally, when we recognize that power, how do we magnify it so that we can begin to manifest the things that we truly want in our lives? And I think that that's really the mission.
And I think that's a good way of looking at it. And I also suspect that truly children need to be able to also be taught how to channel their thoughts and how to make their thoughts work for them. And lots of times their thoughts really work against them.
I think that that's true. In fact, you know, it's interesting. The majority of people, their default mode for thinking is always negative. And I'm not suggesting that that's actually a bad thing. In fact, many times the negativity or what gets labeled as negativity is actually to protect us. And I think most people are, and we explain this in the film, which I think it's really worth watching to see the definition here. But most people kind of get hung up on this idea of having perfect, pristine, powerful, and positive thoughts all the time. And as humans, we just can't do that. It's just not possible. So the question is, where do we have our negative thoughts, and then how do we use those to, in fact, propel ourselves forward too? Because sometimes negative thinking, it's not just to protect us, it propels us. And when we understand really kind of its place, then we really get powerful. And I think that that's an important consideration that most people have never talked about.
I agree with you on that. I've known for myself that when I hit my mid-30s, early 40s, I used to complain to people, I feel half full. I'm missing something. And then it finally occurred to me the only person who could make the difference and supply that other half that I'm missing was myself. And that if I did not take the lead in trying to make this difference, then nobody else could do it for me. I was the only person who was in control of myself in order to get me past this hurdle. And yet, if you take a look at the majority of people in this world, they're all looking at other people or the other part of the world in terms of existence to help lift them out of whatever quagmire they find themselves in.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. You know, one of the things that I think is also really important that people need to kind of remember is that the way that thoughts arrive, most people expect that a thought, you know, when they get a brilliant thought, that's what they should be seeking. And, you know, if it doesn't arrive like that, then it's probably not meant to be. In fact, we've even heard that saying that if it's meant to be, it's up to me. And we'll talk about that a little bit later here in a minute. But the thing to recognize is that all thoughts actually arrive in pairs, meaning there's a positive thought and a negative thought to every thought that arrives. So in other words, when we have something that arrives, let's say, for example, the thought comes and says, you ought to start a business and be an entrepreneur, and you feel really excited, you feel really, you know, pumped about this idea, but then suddenly right behind it is a thought that says you're not quite good enough, or maybe you don't have the experience or the knowledge or the support or the other things that you need. And I think it's really important that we recognize that there will always be that little kind of negative whisper right after. And those thoughts will then land in our programming, and whichever one we've sort of been built to receive better, that's the one that will get power. So if it's a negative sort of programming that we received, or a negative group that we're hanging out with, or the influences that we're receiving, that's the one that will have power. Versus if it's a positive group and a supportive group that we hang out with and we've got positive programming, then that's the one that will have power. So really, even more than the thought, what we need to recognize is that the real power is in who we hang out with. In other words, our influences, not just people, but everything from social media to regular media to our surroundings to, again, this idea of what we believe is possible through our programming. That's even more important sometimes than the thoughts as they arrive, because they do come in that duality. And the only thing that shapes them is really the external reactive circumstances that they arrive in.
I think you're right. I know, for me, I wasn't brought up to consider to be myself beautiful or brilliant. In other words, there were no expectations placed on me. So when I went out into the world, I didn't have anybody telling me I couldn't do it, because they really didn't even believe I would get that far. So when I reached for the moon, inside of me, I did not have any restrictions already placed on me, or whether or not I could measure up to other people's thoughts and whether I should be successful or not. And in some ways, I really feel like I need to write thank you letters to all the people who dismissed me out of hand, because therefore I didn't disappoint anybody, and I certainly disappoint myself because I did not put any thought restrictions on what I could and could not do.
And that's true, right? It's definitely very, very valuable. So, yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. That's cool.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand when they watch your film, you're going to have two kind of reactions. Either you're going to open up somebody's mind to the possibilities of what they can accomplish, or you're going to have other people look at and say, no, I can't do that. That's impossible. No one can do that. And yet in your film, you prove that it's your process of thought that determines whether you can accept what is being taught to you or not accept what is being taught to you.
Well, and it's true, and you get to make that decision. I think one of the things that I think is really an important consideration as well is to make your decisions ahead of time, right? It's not enough to just simply, take things as they arrive and put ourselves in the most reactive state. Certainly we are reactive in our thoughts. Our thoughts always respond to what's in our environment. But if we make some decisions ahead of time, we gain more power over that. And so I really think it's important. In fact, it kind of reminds me of that, thing that you've probably heard before, where people say many people spend more time planning their vacation than they actually do planning their lives. And I think if we spend a little bit more time really considering what are the outcomes that we want to create, what are the things that we really want to have in our life, well, then we can start establishing boundaries around the things that are interrupting us, and we can protect the things and the thoughts that we really want to develop. And at the same token, we also can start to recognize the things that are going to be opportunities and that are going to empower us and that are going to open doors for us. And I think the more that we can kind of become aligned in advance, right? Like in advance of what we want, the easier it will be for us to have that show up in our life.
Now, your movie makes a great point of saying that you need to visualize what you want to obtain. So how do you teach somebody how to visualize? Because a lot of people tell me, well, I can sit down, but I really cannot see in my mind's eye what I really want clearly because I'm really not sure how to project what I want in my mind.
Oh, fair enough. Visualizing is often difficult for some people. And, I think we've got to kind of put a caution around that just because some of this stuff doesn't come easy to you doesn't mean that it doesn't work. There may be some effort that you're going to need to put in, and, it might be something where you've got to kind of strive a little harder or, get a little bit more invested. Now, having said that, I think it's also important to recognize that, not everybody really dials into this in the same way, and that's okay. So I think you've got to find a style that works for you. One of the ways that I personally do it is I actually like to journal a lot. I keep a little notebook with me, and I journal about the things that I'm wanting to do, the things that I'd like to do. In fact, even in my journal, it's funny, sometimes I'll even draw little sketches. I've got a friend that actually puts out, pictures out of a magazine, and again, not necessarily a vision board that they put on their wall, but they actually put it in a scrapbook. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can visualize that will kind of spur what it is that you're looking at. But, I think one of the things that I think is often kind of overlooked when it comes to visualizing, and Marie Diamond said it really well in our film. She said that the things that we surround ourselves with are kind of like a three-dimensional vision board, right? And so if we kind of look a little bit about what it is that we're trying to create in our reality, what is it that we're trying to have in our life, then I think it's really important, right, to kind of surround ourselves with things that are going to enhance that are going to add to it, that are going to support that. And so I would encourage, the listeners now to find a way that has it work for you, but the way to begin is just surrounding yourself with the things that inspire you, and that will get you thinking on a higher plane. That's the beginning of visualization.
And as part of the visualization, then, is the reach into the universe to connect with other like-minded people or like-minded thoughts of people who may share the same vision with you?
I think that's a really good point. Here's the thing that's interesting is a lot of people talk about your network is your net worth. And there is definitely truth to that. You become the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. There's definitely truth to that. But one of the things I think that they're missing on this that no one really talks about is that idea of net worth. And net worth does not just refer to money. In fact, if you break the word down, net and worth, let's take the word worth for a minute. Worth, worthiness, worthwhile, things that you value. If you think about it, those that you spend the most time with actually are a reflection of the things that you value most. And so if you would like to change what's occurring in your life, oftentimes you just need to up-level the people that you're spending time with because you will become a reflection of them. Again, this idea of you become like the 5 people you spend. I like that idea of spend, not spent. Spent is past tense. Spend is current tense. So who are you currently spending time with, right? And that doesn't just mean in person. That means even the books that you're reading, the social media that you're doing, the television that you're there, even, again, the things in your surroundings. And what are you really spending your time with? And you'll find that if you up-level that, everything else in your life will tend to follow because we rise to the standards of those that we surround ourselves with. And I think that's a really important observation.
I think it is because I don't think that most people think about who they spend their time with or what type of things they spend their time with in order for them to move forward with their lives. For example, if kids and adults spend their time playing the violent games, and then they themselves, their thoughts will become violent. They become influenced by the violence that they're constantly playing with.
Yeah, that's definitely true, right? I think that's a great point. I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, I find it interesting for the thought process because you certainly hear many people say, why didn't I think of that? That's, I should have been able to come up with that thought. And yet you can also step back from yourself and say, well, where do my thoughts come from? Your movie points out that they come from experience and they come from a pre-wiring of who you are and what you were, what you will become. But there's also times when people think great thoughts that surprise even themselves that they thought of it in the first place. So how do you explain that?
I think that, and I think that that's also something that scares a lot of people into not doing anything. They get a thought that surprises them. Here's the thing: is there is a psychology principle that most people aren't aware of that actually we should be. It's called investment bias, and it causes a lot of people actually to self-sabotage. And what investment bias basically is oftentimes when an idea or a possibility arrives, people question, have I done enough? Do I know enough? Do I, have the tools to execute on this? And actually, that's the wrong question. It kind of reminds me of when I went out and I did the interviews with the 400 of the world's top achievers. I had this idea that I wanted to start a business. And one of the, people that I met with and that I was talking to, he was a multi-millionaire. And so I went and met with him for lunch and asked him to help me with my business idea. And when I sat with him, I started asking him questions like, what should I do with this? What could I do with that? How will I find this? How will I have this? And I, repeatedly asked questions like this. And he said to me, oh, I can tell by your questions that you're going to have a really small business. And I said to him, what? Like, that's not my goal. He goes, oh, yes, you're going to start a very small business. And so what do you mean by that? He goes, well, because you're asking selfish questions. The questions you're asking are all about what can I, what should I, and all end with I, like it's all up to you. And then he explained the question that you need to ask if you want to build something big are not I questions, but who questions. In other words, who can help me with this? Who could open this door? Who could help me find this? Who could help me do this? Blah, 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 right? All who questions. And I think this is a really big point that most people get paralyzed with. They always lean on that idea. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. And that's absolutely the worst lie that you could ever believe. Nothing big or great was ever built by an individual. Everything that we have around us that is, a big accomplishment, everything major, everything even from the Academy Awards to winning the Olympics to climbing Mount Everest to walking on the moon. If you look at it, everything big that was ever created was done by a team, never an individual. And so I think that that's a big, big challenge that a lot of people seem to miss out on. They don't see that idea, the importance of who. This idea, like we've been talking about in this interview about, who you surround yourself with and all these things making a big idea. That's actually, again, one of the most foundational principles, fundamental principles of success. If you don't surround yourself with great people, you're destined to play at a low level. And it's that simple.
And yet you were taught from birth that you need to do this. It's always the id that's played up to be the most important part, and not it's a team sport. You need the support of. You need the brain power, if you want to put it this way. You need a collective of thoughts coming in order to achieve all of this, because it's all for you. It's just not for me. So where does a person learn how to stop thinking of himself as the id and start thinking as the we?
Yeah, well, I think that's where our educational system has really, really failed us, right? It has really, really failed us. Because, again, even in education, we're taught, and I'm sorry if there's, people that believe in the school system, but, I've always thought that like a test, like an exam, say your math test or something like that, things like that should be taken as a team, not as an individual, right? We should be trained that we need to solve these problems together rather than as an individual. And by the way, maybe I'm venting a little bit when I say this, but I believe that a lot of our problems that we have, if you look at even our society, a lot of these challenges that are now happening with the, race questions and a lot of the other challenges, that we're experiencing, It's because our society has trained us to be selfish. Our society has trained us to be individual and to look at finding solutions on our own rather than as a group. And if we were trained to be together and unified and to solve things as a team, I have a feeling that a lot of the results that we experience as people would be very different than what we experience today.
So we raised our kids the way we work with the kids on team sports, baseball, football, soccer, which are all team endeavors. You have to work as the one, but everybody has their part to play. There should be a difference of the mental attitude then of what comes next in our thought process.
Yeah, and not just team sports. I think team sports, okay, so that's one way to look at it. But I think everything, including our education, everything, right? Like it should all be done as a team because that's the way top achievers really do things in real life. If you look even in the corporate world, you know, the most successful things that are ever accomplished are generally done by a team, not an individual. Of course, there's things that people can do individually within the team, but they need to understand that every success as individual is part of a larger context, right? And that context is the team. Even if you work for a company and you're accountable for something as an individual, it's the company that wins, not the individual, right? Like you've got to play as a team. And I think that that's such a big thing that most people don't understand, right?
Well, I think that a lot of people are afraid that they join a team or a collective, if you want to put it that way, that they themselves will lose their individuality or their individual thought processes, so they no longer will think for themselves but be forced to think for their fellow man, to think for the group rather than for themselves. And I think there's a disconnect in their thinking.
I think you're right. Yeah, that's true.
So when you were interviewing the multimillionaires and everything, what other gems of wisdom that they shared with you that enabled them to process their thoughts and use their thoughts in such a way that embraced the we concept instead of the I concept?
Wow. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about there. Obviously, the interviews that I did took place over the space of 10 years, and many of these guys are still close friends of mine, and I still meet with them and, in fact, even have them help me solve my problems day to day. So it's an ongoing thing. I think, now, obviously, I'm not trying to just put in a plug for the books and materials that I've created, but a lot of these ideas...
I asked you that because I know that when I own and operate an internet talk radio station, and I started it from scratch. And I know that when I embrace the theory of we, it's a team sport instead of the I, my station exploded. So I'm just asking for more for information for me and for other would-be entrepreneurs who may want to start out on the right foot of their thought processing, rather than have to
go through I think one of the first things that most people are also missing. Yeah, well, I guess just to kind of, conclude with some really useful thoughts in this regard, one of the things that I found to be really profound was, again, when I was a young man, I wanted to start a business, and I took this business idea to one of these mentors, and the thing that immediately was pointed out was that I didn't have clarity around the transactions that I was trying to create, right? So in other words, my business plan and everything was all focused on the marketing. It was focused on, trying to find out who the demographic was, to figure out, how I would deliver this product and all these things. But until you understand what's the key transaction you're trying to get people to make, it really was kind of a shallow effort, right? Like there's no point figuring out a market plan until you really understand what you want people to do, right? So just getting that clarity up front. And it's interesting. I love this quote that we share in our training that we do, that a goal that is specific and clear becomes attainable and near. And until you have that clarity at the outset, it's really hard to create anything, because you're always kind of waffling between one thing to another, because you just don't have clarity on what it is that you're looking to do. So for entrepreneurs especially, you need to find the clarity around what it is is what's the transaction you're getting people to do, right? And what I mean by that is, okay, so they're going to give you money, and you're going to give them either an asset, a service, or information. That's the only three things you can sell. So what is that going to look like, right? And in this transaction, what are the steps that need to be accomplished in order for you to be able to deliver that and also collect the funds? And, once you've what you've identified what those steps are in the transaction, you can actually look at now progress, because you can scale from there. You can, delegate. You can, train people. You can bring others on board. Then you can really answer that who question, because you know with clarity what you're trying to accomplish.
You can almost say that you can apply that to your thought process.
100% in all things. And clarity always.
Like the way this is going. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really, that's why I was asking, because I really believe that if people are given the opportunity to understand what they need to do in order to start a business, for example, life is a business. Your thought processes dictate to you and everybody else you're involved with what's going to happen once you can identify the problem and then deliver it or solve to whoever is wanting to buy it from you or to be bartered for or whatever. And I think that it makes your thoughts clearer of what you're trying to achieve or what you as a society is trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great way to articulate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I don't charge that much. Just kidding. Okay, now, Douglas, could you please tell everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web, how to get in touch with you, training, and all that pertinent information?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first place I'm going to suggest people go is to go see the movie. And there's a lot that you're going to gain from that. Right now we've actually got a special offer where you'll also get the workbook, some audio training, and a Power Thoughts book and the movie all in one spot. So it's a really special promotion right now. Head over and grab that at www.howthoughtsbecomethings.com. That's howthoughtsbecomethings.com. And then, of course, you can find me on the net. We've got lots of great tools. In fact, I would suggest checking out our YouTube channel. You just type in my name, you'll find that. And then follow me on Instagram. There's lots of free tools there, and we look forward to getting to know you.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen and adults of all ages, you can hear this interview with Douglas all over again at https://passionateworldtalkradio.com, right-hand side menu, click down, Cool Your Heels with Lillian, click on it, and voila, you should hear it. If you're technologically challenged, we have a sizzle line. You can find the number on the sizzle line page. Just call it up on your cell phone, and you can listen to the whole interview immediately. You can also find it in iTunes, iHeart, Spreaker, Amazon, Alexa, also on Cool Your Heels, AMFM247.com/Lillian Cauldwell, heard every Tuesday evening from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. And before you go away, Joseph Spence said this to say in 1756, the happiness of life is so nice a thing that, like the sensitive plant, it shrinks away even upon thinking of it. So thank you all very much for listening. And remember, please keep listening. Thank you.